the safeguarding of our environment. I also have Robert Mudida, and I want to say thank you, and George Wood, sorry, and Artisha. And I want to say thank you to the teams behind Shared Value and Strathmore for all the work you have done to give us this last session of the CEO program. I feel very proud. Two things. The last session decided to peep into the Cfta, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, because we know we need to grow the African market, the economic market, the integration of the African peoples in a way that we reduce, or rather increase, wealth generation. I'd rather be positive regarding that. This is a very difficult question, and I'll place a story before you, and from there I'll speak about certain things. The story is that yesterday I was speaking to another of our cabinet, the top cabinet secretary, the CS for Interior and Coordination of National Strategy. And while looking through the data, we were talking about livestock in Africa. Livestock, meat, cows, dairy, chicken, pig, and even fishing, the fishing industry. And you know, Africa, 55 countries, we are ranked 13th in terms of number of animals in the world as Africa, not as Kenya, as Africa. We are ranked 138th in productivity, especially of livestock products and value. I looked at the map of the disease-free zones around our country, and I found out that we are just about a third of the country that is disease-free, that we can safely say those animals can have a certification of origin safely, that we have recorded our safety and quality at an international level. However, we don't have product sources certification. We do not have ability to know where my meat or your meat comes from in Africa. That's a story. Now, it's sad in a sense. And therefore, these are the little things I'll present to you. First, thank you to all the 29 Africans that are signatories. I will ask Dr. Francis Mangeni to correct me if I get the facts wrong, but I think we are just about 29. 20?
Yeah, 30 now. 30,
yeah, oh,
30.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Francis, for being there for me. It's nice to see you here. Francis has been working in the COMESA for a long time, but now I think he's retiring to start a new job. He'll tell you more about that. So 30 countries are signatories. Those 30 countries are part of the 55 countries, 54, 55 countries in Africa that want the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And we must ask ourselves, why are the other countries delaying so long after 3 years to have an agreement within their own local states on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? That's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. When you have many people, the tendency is not to be, tyrannical, but rather encourage integration at the top level and then encourage integration at the bottom level. That means that leaders must demonstrate their passion about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area for the obvious reasons that we are geographically proximate, that we share very many values, and that we are a country that can offer a significant value addition to each other because of our geographical unity. But from an economic perspective, I don't think that's true. Okay. Transportation, communication, tariff, both the common external trade tariffs, the common currency costs, there are very many things. So it's not so easy to say, I can trade with Nigeria, I can trade with Ghana, I can trade with Mauritania, I can trade with Burkina Faso, I can trade with South Africa, I can trade with Tanzania and Uganda because we have worked a lot. But even with here in Kenya, for instance, with our colleagues, the Ugandans and the Tanzanians and the Somalis and the Sudanese and Rwanda and Burundi, and all our partners in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, all right, we still find it hard to come to an agreement. And these are proximate countries. So how do we get our presidents and our political leaders and our business leaders to accept that this is the best way to go, which I think it is, in my humble opinion. It's a very important way to go if we want to retain a certain level of decision and sovereignty. Divided we fall, united we stand, as the saying goes. Then the third thing that I'd like to express is e-commerce. That could be a fantastic way to begin. I think by 2018, our total Africa trade, e-commerce trade, was only 2% of the Africa trade. That's 2018. I don't know what the statistics are now, but I know that the figure is in the region of $16.5 billion. What's the target? The target is around $50 billion. Okay, so how does a trajectory of $50 billion on e-commerce that will enable us look at the currency, that will enable us try things regarding how we exchange currency and the cost of exchange, how financial transactions are done, our banking sector, our technology platforms to ensure sending and receipt of money, protocols regarding that, technology centers. How do we do that? And this is a question that most of us here as a panel, but also as a speaker, need to question. There is a question that has been bothering me, and that is communication. Well, one of the major sources of our information with regard to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is Tralac. Tralac is actually a South African company, a news agency from South Africa, the Western Cape, from the Western Cape, I think. And I'm just wondering how many of the African countries can demonstrate that they're able to deliver adequate information for businesses to make decisions. How many can be sure of the products online if we go in an e-commerce way? How can we communicate the value from the point of view of the last mile? In other words, what are we contributing to poverty eradication or wealth generation, for that matter? What are the incentives there? Lately, in my country, it has very proficient business people. We have decided to push more than 70 economic processing zones. Sadly, I say sadly not because I don't like the partners we have for those economic zones, but frankly speaking, it leaves me a little bit baffled after the Cfta. How many African countries have we encouraged to take up those export processing zones? Well, the largest or lion's share of those export processing zones is China. And I have no problem about China trading with us if we are trading for the sake of economic development. Welcome, China, no problem. But there is something wrong when we look at the entire platform of economic partnerships for Kenya, a signatory to Cfta, and you don't see any other African country, or rather, you don't know whether you have an African country. What are the incentives and targets? Another thing is targets. So Cfta probably should look at targets. Can I increase 10% trade value for the ECOWAS, for the Central African States, for the CENSAD, for the Maghreb, for the SADC? How can I increase 10% more? Is it possible? And my feeling is that the opportunity is just amazing. I talked to Francis a year and a half ago, or probably a year ago, and we were just looking at the service industry within African countries. And I think the statistic then that we were looking at was $82 billion. $82 billion. Sorry. Chitra, am I on?
You are.
Okay, thank you. So we are looking at $82 billion from the perspective of a gap or opportunity in service industry. And here we are talking about the vast majority of, or a large portion of the trade in Africa: finance, tourism, ICT, law, accounting. I mean, there's so many things. I notice Vuyo Lutseke is in. Welcome, Luyo. Then, so communication and communicating good things is very fundamental, and demonstrating that we are actually putting our money where our mouth is. Then the last thing, and sorry for keeping you. Yeah, with Tiki Bernard, we are really thinking of building a big research center around the CEOs of Africa and those interested in partnering with Africa. So how do we encourage trade liberalization in Africa and maintain a simple but very attractive intra-African trade? Because I think that we cannot destroy the current trade, rather we should try to encourage it, and that means encouraging trade liberalization without killing the African market. How do we support the poorer countries? How do we fight non-tariff barriers? You know, there are many in Africa. It depends on administration of the police, administration of the borders, the customs protocol. I mean, it's just crazy. How do we go one by one without hurrying and without pushing people to a corner? How do we go one by one to each country or each quarter of a country, distribute them and help them understand that if business has to go on, these little non-tariff barriers are critical in terms of elimination for business. I can't be paying corruption or what we call rental for 20% of my, income. It's crazy. But who will follow up, and which legal structures and juridical structures are we going to put in place? So how do we put this regional research center from a sustainable point of view? And with those few remarks, I want to say that every journey starts with a first step. And I think the first step is private sector coming in and supporting the government policy sector, the leadership, political leadership, and encouraging them to understand that if we create an ambience politically and policy-wise for Africa free trade, we will improve very, very many lives in Africa. Thank you very much. Now, may I invite my colleague and partner, Tiki Bernard. Sorry for taking too long.
Thank you, Dr. George. Thank you. As always, happy to be here and to partner with Strathmore Business School. The Shared Value Africa initiative, as you mentioned, Dr. George, together with Strathmore Business School, we're on a mission to build the shared value movement and community across our continent. And I today want to thank Strathmore Business School, Strathmore University, and Dr. George for believing in the power of creating shared value. It was Albert Einstein that said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And in order to build back better during this decade of action, business needs to shift to creating economic value and simultaneously creating value for society and the environment. And that is creating shared value. So afternoon, everybody. As Dr. George said, my name is Dickie Barnard. I'm the CEO of the Shared Value Africa Initiative. We're a Pan-Africa organization, for those who don't know. We launched 29 months ago, and we represent the global shared value community in our region. Our purpose is to build the most impactful shared value business network across our region. We've got sister networks that include India, Hong Kong, Australia, North America, and South America. And Dr. George, everything and all the challenges that we're facing with AFCFTA on January the 1st, 2021, a new dawn for our beautiful continent will rise as we officially implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It has, as you said, Dr. George, the potential to change our continent forever and rid us of the shackles of colonialism and give us the opportunity to be a leader on the world stage. As Africans, we should be proud. In terms of numbers of participating countries, the AFCFTA will be the world's largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization. Estimates from the Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, suggest that the AFCFTA has the potential both to boost intra-Africa trade by 52.3% by eliminating import duties and to double this trade if non-tariff barriers are also reduced. The AFCFTA will provide many opportunities, including creating a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business persons and investments, and thus pave the way for accelerating our economic recovery. It is estimated that COVID-19 has probably set the African economy back 20 years with an estimated GDP contraction of 3.4%. So we need the AFCFTA to be successful, as it can be a game changer. However, as Dr. George has mentioned, all the challenges that we face, for the AFCFTA to be a success, there are many, many challenges. And please allow me to mention two today, as I'm sure our speakers will highlight more and maybe provide solutions as well. First is infrastructure development. In order to trade, we need railroads, we need harbors, we need roads, we need airports, etc. The infrastructure gap in Africa has been widening and the bankable projects has decreased. And therein lies the business opportunity for all our business leaders here today. And we need to make work of it. Secondly, for the AFCFTA to contribute to Africa's economic recovery, we also need to produce more and manufacture locally. According to the EU's Eurostat statistics in 2019, almost 70% of goods exported from the EU to Africa were manufactured goods. Also, when we look at the intra-trade exports, intra-African exports, that was only 16.6%. And if you compare it to what happens in Europe, is 68.1%, Asia is 59.4%, and America is 55%. So in closing, we have 55 countries on our beautiful continent. And in order for the AFCFTA to be a success, and for all to benefit, we need to take action and consciously work together, as Dr. George also said, with the intent to bring about change. Build back better for all and not only for a privileged few. And the power lies in the collective. Together, we're far more stronger than on my own. And my plea today is for us all to collaborate and create that unity to create the Africa we want. Thank you, and back to Chitra.
Thank you, Tiki. Thank you, Dr. Jenga, for both of your remarks. And so now we'll shift into our main panel. We're honored today to have very distinguished leaders and experts with us. Professor Robert Medida, Professor of Political Economy, Strathmore University Business School. Nzioga Waita, Chief of Staff of State House and Head of Kenya's Presidential Delivery Unit. Dr. Francis Mangeni, Director of Trade, Customs and Monetary Affairs, COMESA. George Wood, Customer Operations Manager and Customs Customer Support Manager, DHL Express, Sub-Sahara Africa. R.T. Shaw, Chief Operating Officer, Africa Farlow Medical, and Bright Simmons, President, M Pedigree Network. Each of these panelists will take a few minutes, about 2 to 3 minutes, to share their perspectives on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Then I'll moderate the discussion for about a half an hour, and then we'll get into audience questions for the remaining 20 minutes. Please enter any questions you have in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try our best to get to your questions. Professor Robert Medida, if I can invite you to begin with sharing your perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Chitra. It's a great privilege to be here this afternoon. And I would say that the African Continental Free Trade Area represents the realization of a vision that started with the Abuja Treaty of 1991, where an African economic community was envisaged. And it's a very central part of the whole African Renaissance project, because since the early 2000s, we've been talking about Africa rising. And there's a lot of evidence for that narrative of Africa rising. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is a very, very central element of this Africa rising narrative. It comes in at a very critical time. First of all, when Africa has one of the lowest rates of intra-regional trade. Our intra-African trade is at about 15%. If you compare that to the European Union, whose intra-regional trade is 67%, Asia, whose inter-regional trade is 61%. Africa is only ahead of Oceania, okay, the general area of Australia and New Zealand, which has an inter-regional trade of about 7%. So one of the most important contributions of the African Continental Free Trade Area is enhancing intra-African trade. And there seems to be tremendous potential for this. But in order for this to be realized, a number of critical policy areas need to be addressed. One of the most important ones is the question of regional value chains. For the African Continental Free Trade Area to realize its potential, we need to fully develop regional value chains in Africa. And for that to happen, a very central aspect, policy aspect of the Continental Free Trade Area that needs to be addressed is rules of origin, because rules of origin is what determines how member states are going to benefit, and it's going to ensure that a lot of the benefits, in fact, accrue to African states. For that to happen, there has to be a good value proposition for African member states. Products produced within the African Continental Free Trade Area have to be competitive in terms of price. It has to be interesting. It has to be economically viable for firms within member states, for the private sector within member states to source inputs from and products from the Continental Free Trade Area. Because if there isn't a viable value proposition, then they're going to continue sourcing inputs and goods extra regionally from other regions of the world. So that's a very central policy aspect that needs to be addressed. So we can say that as a lot of economic concepts guide us, that the central factor driving growth in economies is innovation. So a very, very important policy pillar for the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area will be how much we're able to innovate. We have to keep up with and even exceed innovation in other competing regions if we want the African Continental Free Trade Area to be viable. This is very central. We have to find complementarities in production. that are central among the different member states. To do this, we need to overcome a number of critical challenges that we've had in the last few decades. Africa is not new to regional economic blocs. Indeed, even at present, we have 8 economic communities in different parts of Africa. But many of them have faced critical challenges. We've faced major challenges of implementation. Policies are only as good as their implementation. In the past, we've had a major emphasis on formal arrangements of integration instead of focusing on regional value chains and benefits, direct benefits to member states. So as a result of that, many regional trading blocs in African regions have had major lapses in implementation. Look at the East African community. On paper, it's supposed to be an economic community with free factor movements. We are very far from achieving that ideal of free factor movements, even among the East African community member states. So big issue we need to overcome is implementation lapses. Another major challenge is lack of political will and focus. And this is closely related to the issue of state capacity. Among many of the member states in African countries, we have weak states that don't have sufficient state capacity, even to address their own internal challenges. And what one can say is in the area of regional integration, weak states make weak international organizations. So a central priority for us to address from a policy perspective is to strengthen our state capacity in African countries. And if we're able to overcome these challenges and particularly become more innovative, foster innovation, put innovation policy as a centerpiece, put the private sector as a centerpiece of the regional integration initiatives, we're much more likely to succeed. Because one of the problems we've had with regional integration initiatives in Africa is they've been too state-centric. They're driven primarily by the state and by African elites. And the private sector is not very involved in negotiation processes. And so we come up with very nice agreements on paper, but then it's very difficult to implement them. Another central issue that we need to address is product complexity. Compared to global standards, our product complexity is still below average in many African member states. There are few exceptions, but in many African member states, the product complexity is very basic, and product complexity is very closely related with economic growth and welfare gains from regional integration. So one thing we have to think seriously about as we develop the African Continental Free Trade Area is develop regional value chains in Africa to enhance product complexity. And if we're able to do that, then we can say that the African Continental Free Trade Area will indeed feed very well into the African rising narrative and will be a key part of the Africa rising narrative. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is indeed our hope and our future. And we need to think very carefully about how we can build a very firm foundation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mudida. Nzioka, can I ask you to go next? And to our panelists, if you could kindly stay to the sort of 2 to 3 minutes in terms of your opening remarks. Nzioka?
Thank you, Chitra. I think I'll be very brief. Africa has just come out of we've just gone through 60 years of post-colonial and post-independence development. These last 60 years have been very inward-looking, very introverted. The countries have been doing their best to develop themselves. They have really taken the time to define their nationalities and focused a lot on sovereignty. But a lot has changed. We have very many big fish in small ponds now, and the world has become a lot more integrated. And as previous speakers have mentioned, we cannot exist without each other. And the question of inter-African trade is not an optional question, it's an existential issue that Africans must address. because the next 60 years will be about achieving Africa's potential as an economic powerhouse. And that's what the Vision 2063 is all about. And the Continental Free Trade Agreement perhaps is the cornerstone of that ambition. And to that extent, I think it's something that every African government must pay attention to in a manner that almost supersedes its own national and domestic interests. On the home front, I think Kenya is a committed member of the African Union, and President Kenyatta is an unapologetic Pan-Africanist. We were one of the first countries to sign, ratify, and deposit the instruments in Addis Ababa. And I think our credentials as a country that supports Pan-Africanism are without question. More so, I think Kenya has come out very clearly as a country that is in support of multilateralism and a rule-based trading environment in the world. So I think to that extent, we don't need to be convinced to support any initiatives that touch on anchoring and actualizing the free trade area. Kenya, I think if we look closer to home, Kenya's exports, 40% of Kenya's exports are destined to the region. So primarily manufactured goods. Now, most of these exports go to existing regional economic communities. So primarily within the EAC and within COMESA. Now, with the coming on stream of the Continental Free Trade Area, this portends a huge upside for Kenya because it now opens up Central Africa, it opens up West Africa, and it opens up Northwestern Africa. So countries like Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, which we have absolutely no preferential trade arrangements in place, are now opened up, and this is a huge opportunity for our business community. It provides markets for our manufactured goods, and it provides market access to our agricultural exports. And all of these go towards our medium-term plan under the Big Four, which is growing our share of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, and more importantly, increasing the per capita income from agriculture. And this for us is a key enabling factor and one of the real drivers of our interest in the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Aside, of course, from diversifying our FDI and just increasing business investment opportunities, cross-border business investment opportunities for us. I think in terms of our commitment to enabling the CFTA, I think Kenya has made commendable steps, very public steps over the last couple of years to improve its ease of business standing. We continue to lay emphasis on the issue of the infrastructure gap with specific reference to regional connectivity, both in terms of hard infrastructure and in terms of digital infrastructure. Now, when it looks at hard infrastructure, I think if you look at what we've done in terms of opening up regional connectivity between Kenya and Tanzania, you now have the Voi Taveta Highway. You now have under planning, funded by the African Development Bank, you have Malindi to Lungalunga and the Tanzania border. On the Uganda side, we have the standard gauge railway, the dry port in Naivasha, we have the meter gauge railway, we have the Mau Summit expressway, which will open up traffic going to Western Kenya and into Uganda. We also have planned the Mau Summit Malaba corridor, which gives us a complete through pass going into Uganda. On the Ethiopian front, you have very critical roads for the first time opening up movement between Kenya and Ethiopia. So this is Isiolo and Moyale Road. Then you have the Todonyang, Lokitang, Kalokol Road, which provides now seamless connectivity into Ethiopia. On the South Sudan front, you have Nakadok, Nadapal. Again, these are places which were very difficult to access, but now you can have trucks, you can have cargo moving very seamlessly between those border fronts. You have the one-stop border posts that have now come into operation. So places like Taveta, Namanga, Busia, all of which are key trade enablers, right? And all of these purposed towards improving regional trade. You have the Mombasa area port development project, which is improving mobility around the port, the removal of cargo from ships, both domestically destined and foreign destined. We have Lamu port now coming into on stream within the course of the year that will provide huge transshipment opportunities for cargo that is coming within the region. And you have big steps that we have taken as a country to strengthen our digital infrastructure. As you know, Kenya is currently launching a unique identifier for its citizens. These are databases that are queried and they're easily accessible and will provide seamless movement of persons within the country and within the region. And it provides us with a very strong standing point from which to really start facilitating the movement of persons as well. So I think as an entry point, I just want to emphasize that Kenya is an anchor and a great supporter of the Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I was going to say to the remaining panelists, if you could kindly stay to the 2 to 3 minutes. Professor Mudida and Nzioka, I appreciate their passion, and they went a little bit over. So Dr. Mangeni, you're next. If you could kindly stay to your 2 to 3 minutes, please. Is Dr. Mangeni still on the line?
Yes. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Chitra, for the opportunity to make this presentation. I have got just 3 slides, so don't worry. I won't take too much of your time. So first of all, could I just make a small correction that I finished my tenure with the COMESA. As George pointed out, I retired, but then I was asked to come back to work. So I'm now head of trade promotion and programs at the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Maybe for a short time, then I resume my retirement. Now, what I want to do is simply to take colleagues through just a few things. And fortunately, Professor Mudida has made my work easy by making the point that the African Continental Free Trade Area is the latest iteration of regional integration in Africa. It's the front line, it's where we have reached. But after a long journey that started way back with Pan-Africanism. The first Pan-African conference was held in the year 1900. And up to the period of 1957, we were basically trying to improve the living conditions of colonized people. But from 1957, when the independence of Ghana, up to 1963, we really wanted political emancipation or independence, which was actually achieved in 1990, with the independence of Namibia and the release of Nelson Mandela. Then we switched to economic Pan-Africanism. So 1991, we had the Abuja Treaty. The year 2000, we had the African Union to speak with a stronger voice on the international scene. Then from 2013 up to the future 2063, we adopted Agenda 2063, which aims to see a free, peaceful, prosperous Africa that is influential on the international scene. So it's within this context of Agenda 2063, this blueprint for 50 years, that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is an agreement signed so far by 54 countries of Africa. The only country which hasn't signed is Eritrea. And as I was just telling George, we now have 30 ratifications. Nigeria has just ratified a few days ago, but they haven't deposited their instrument of ratification with the chairperson of the African Union. When they do so, we shall count the number to be 31. Now, what's the value proposition of the African Continental Free Trade Area? Together, we form the 11th biggest economy in the whole world. Returns on investment are estimated at 6.5%, which is higher than 6.0% at the global level, according to estimates by the Overseas Development Institute. It's a $3.4 trillion economy, with consumer and business spending already estimated at $4 trillion annually, and of course, a huge population of more than 1.2 billion. We are a young continent. Median age is 19.7 years, which means energy, ideas, passions, dreams to be commercialized, to be turned into businesses. We've got enormous natural resources, as everybody knows, 60% of the world's arable land. So though we have been hit by COVID, as one of the guest speakers said, IMF estimates that we are beginning to recover, and the African economy will grow by 3.1% next year, 2021. So it's not all doom and gloom. Now, what do the people of Africa expect? If implemented, the African Continental Free Trade Area will put 30 million people out of extreme poverty and improve the lives of 68 million people who are living on less than $5 per day. This is according to estimates by the World Bank. So this is big, it's a big deal, and it's a strong political message. It's also a clarion call to business. We want socio-economic transformations towards the Africa we want. That is one which is prosperous and peaceful and internationally efficacious or influential. To have the Africa we want, however, we must be the Africans we want. Each and every one of us, you, myself, as individuals, we must be better versions of ourselves continuously. But also as communities and as countries, and as companies, we must continuously improve and see how we can achieve the Africa we want by making our contribution from our point of view. So what should actors do, like ourselves, like yourselves? Use the AfCFTA trade instruments like the Certificate of Origin and the Customs Declaration. Then the African Continental Free Trade Area will be in place, in action. Lobby government and its regulatory agencies to continuously improve the trading regime by pointing out what challenges you're facing so that they can be corrected. And then join active public-private academia sector partnerships so that you can provide input into policymaking and correction as well. Champion women, youth, and SMEs so that the African Continental Free Trade Area can be inclusive. No one should be left behind. No individual should be left behind. No country should be left behind. And of course, we need innovation and entrepreneurial education, which Strathmore Business School knows all too well and champions. So this is what I wanted to say. I hope I have been within my 3 minutes. These are my new contacts in case somebody wants to contact me. I would like maybe to point out just one last thing, that there is strong political ownership across the board in Africa, as the colleague from Kenya was saying. That's across the board, across Africa. So we can hope that implementation will be better going forward, much better than we have had in the regional economic communities where we have always had challenges. I think the game has changed. The African Continental Free Trade Area is indeed a game changer. Thank you so much.
George Wood.
Hello, hello everyone. Many thanks to Strathmore and Shared Value for inviting me on. I feel very humbled in the presence of all these very esteemed people on the panel. So let's get to it. So what's the African Continental Free Trade Agreement? What does it mean? Well, it's going to be a game changer, especially if you consider our geographical location, the continent of Africa. We're right on the doorstep of another economic superpower, and that's Europe. And we're halfway between the Americas and Asia Pacific. So if we look into the region, the AfTA, it's going to encourage trading with other bloc members, and the harmonization of tariffs will make African companies more competitive. Harmonization and digitalization of customs systems plus the removal of current non-tariff barriers for block members will mean a reduction in clearance times, leading to shorter shipment transit times within the region. This will be of specific importance. I think George brought it up right at the very beginning. It's going to be of specific importance to e-commerce. That is going to be a catalyst for this continent as we embrace the fourth industrial revolution, as we all hear on our TVs. President Ramaphosa down here in South Africa. Why is it important? Well, you know, if we look at the European markets or the American and Asian markets, they have this thing called instant gratification. Someone goes online, they buy a handbag in the evening, it's delivered in the morning. That's instant gratification. That is how quick, you know, if we get it right, that people can order their goods and receive their goods by using technology. And we need to grasp that, because it's going to drive volume. And by driving volume, it brings up capacity. We see more aircraft coming in because there's more shipments to go to be loaded to those aircraft, which then brings lower prices and it brings tourists. So it's all about bringing money into the continent, bringing money into individual fiscuses, and uplifting the populations of those countries. It doesn't just start with shipments. Shipments is a seed. It's a bigger thing. It's bigger than all of us. So it's hugely important. How can the private sector, how can we help achieve this? I'm going to say it: compliance, compliance, compliance. From a shipping, sorry. I'll put my timer on. Okay, so how can we help achieve this? Compliance, compliance, compliance. It's imperative that companies perform their due diligence prior to shipping internationally, and this includes within the region. Customs rely on risk-based processes, and it's all about trust. It's all about building that trust, knowing that the customers are actually compliant when it comes to shipping internationally. So know your products is correctly classify your products, understand the import and the export requirements of your products. So import licenses, certificates of origin, etc. And do not undervalue your shipments. We need to be compliant. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, George. Arti?
Thank you, and thank you for having me today. So just brief introduction, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Africa for Fala, which is a UK-based medical devices manufacturer and lead supplier to the NHS. But my background is technology, and I also advise companies and governments on solving stubborn problems. I will talk about the ways in which the Cfta will and can bring opportunities to Fala as a foreign company later in the discussion, but I just want to bring some opportunities to the table now. First, let's go back to basics. What goods and services do Africans need that the African private sector can produce sustainably? Tiki, I will assume that we've built all the physical and digital infrastructure we need. But for example, Africa has an annual $35 billion food import bill, yet we keep being told we have a latent advantage in agriculture, and in my view, regenerative agriculture. And Dr. Njenga mentioned Africa's livestock ranking in his introduction, but why should West Africans drink ersatz milk from Europe when we have Hausa Fulani cows? Can we use, this is the opportunity, Kenyan expertise to help milk production in heat-stressed countries? After all, the Cfta is about free trade in services as much as it is in products. Second opportunity, how about affordable assistive technologies such as wheelchairs or canes that are deliberately made for our broken pavements? Today, we import these predominantly, and we don't import enough. If we were to innovate, something that has already come up in other people's introductions, manufacture and trade them on the continent, we could potentially enable many more people to be comfortable and productive, which has a knock-on impact on the economy. Another opportunity, how can the AfCFTA help the continent move to a circular economy? How can we as a continent become smarter about shifting from the take, make, dispose to a model in which waste is input into the next product? And it's only as a continent and as regions that we will have scale. As an example, let's start substituting cement with agri-waste. One, we cannot urbanize in Africa by continually digging up riverine sand. Two, we are not valorizing crop residue. We often burn it, so we are burning money. It will be important to have a single standards setting agency and efficient enforcement. We don't want unregulated waste turning up in concrete. So in summary, if the AfCFTA is successful, we will see more R&D and commercialization of products and brands made in Africa. We'll see import substitution, and we'll see more Africans being reached, because at the moment, not all of our citizens even have access to what they need. Thank you.
Arti, thank you so much. Right?
Thank you very much, Chitra. And I will follow your injunction and be briefer than I intended to be, so we can save some time.
Yes.
I think the right way to look at this is to say, okay, what came before, after? That gives us some lessons about what could unfold. And the African Economic Community is, of course, the immediate precursor. And for those of you that remember, it came in force in 1994. And if you follow the trajectory that was established by the African Economic Community in respect of the common market, we would have been in stage 5 and stage 6 if we had followed that specific trajectory, or if we had maintained that specific trajectory. And in stage 5 and stage 6, let's remember what we were supposed to be doing in stage 5. We were supposed to have established a common market with full set of common policies, and created the foundation for a common central bank, a common currency, and then a monetary union. What is surprising is that of those specific sequence of activities, it is the one that is not economics related that has made the most progress, and that is in respect of establishing the Pan-African Parliament. So it's quite fascinating that even before, after, as a consequence of the Abuja Treaty, we were already anticipating much closer integration than we are now. Because if you remember, based on the Abuja Treaty, by 2028, we're supposed to have a fully integrated market, common central bank, common currency, and the rest of it. It is quite clear that today in 2020, November 2020, almost 2021, we will not achieve the objectives of the Abuja Treaty. Enter after. And a lot of the previous speakers have established the fact that the regional economic communities, and I completely agree with Dr. Mangeni that it is the regional economic communities that provides us both with the inspiration and also the canvas for evaluating what is possible and the after. And like everything else in Africa, you get both the best and the worst examples, or both the most inspiring and least inspiring examples looking within Africa itself. And that is why we have the outstanding successes that we've seen as far as integration is concerned in the southern tip of the continent, in SADC and in SACU, versus where I live, the West, in ECOWAS. And so the question should be, how do we use the distinctions that are observable between the SADC situation and the ECOWAS situation to chart a number of key principles for making after a success? And for those of you that are not familiar with these distinctions, let me explain that if you go to the southern region, already intra-Africa trade is substantially above the regional average, the continental average. And in West Africa, it's significantly below. The interesting though is that when you look at the history of the most integrated part of the continent, which is SACU, three things, not always the most obvious three things, come to mind. One of them is that cultural integration is quite important, and often we forget that. So one of the things that you notice about the SACU, the Southern African Customs Union, is the strong degree of cultural integration among the countries that are there. And that's often something we don't pay attention to at all. The creative arts, the music, all of that kind of thing. And I think it's important and we need to pay attention. The second element is the presence of a regional hegemon. So South Africa as a regional hegemon is so much more effective in creating the winds, the tailwinds that drive the other countries along. This is a geopolitical point about whether or not there is leadership within the African integration process, and certain countries can step up even more forcefully. Kenya in the east, Nigeria in the west, South Africa in the south. And though it's uncomfortable, the brutal reality is that hegemons increase efficiency. The third, not so fashionable point, and perhaps not as popular, is the fact that we often forget that in addition to SACU having these cultural credentials and antecedents, it was also founded in 1910, way before some of these sovereign structures of post-independence Africa came into being. And therefore, it had these legacy advantages of the absence of some of the sovereignty restrictions that have prevented the African Economic Community and other integration projects from being the runaway successes they could be. So the question that I want to pose is, to what extent are we willing as Africans to relax our sovereignty when matters of integration come to the fore, bearing in mind that we don't going to have the 1910 to 2000 span of time that SACU had to kind of deal with all of those issues, because we are currently down to the wire. We have 10 years or so to get to the 2030 vision, which is quite global, SDGs and all of that, and 2063 is not that far off. The other point I want to make is in respect of the ECOWAS situation, is that if we were to have followed the initial trajectory in ECOWAS, free trade in most industrial goods should have happened by 2000. So we are 20 years behind the deadline. And one of the critical elements that have emerged in that respect, I think, is the fact that just having the bare infrastructure of soft regulations and even the hard infrastructure of rules and the like is not enough. What we need beyond all of that is true narratives that connect the average business person to the regional vision. Thank you.
All right, so we've had a lot of very rich macro and some level of micro comments from all of our speakers. What I'd love to do now in this next piece of moderation is get very micro and very specific as we can, because as we talked about, and a lot of the speakers have said, you know, a lot of folks are listening into this session today, innovation, ideas, and I'm sure people want to walk away with some very specific ideas. And so I want to encourage our panelists now for us to get very micro and very piercing in this moderated piece. We've talked about barriers, some of the top barriers with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in the areas of policy and programs in terms of harmonization, implementation, commercial barriers, infrastructure barriers. I'd like to actually focus on ideas or solutions and ask each of you to give a very specific idea or solution that you have in each of these areas. So starting with policy and program barriers or harmonization. And I'd like to direct this to Robert and Nzioka. A specific idea from each of you on solving the top barrier in that category around policy, program barriers, harmonization issues, your top solution to solve that. Robert and then Nzioka.
Okay, thanks very much. Chitra, I'll just make a couple of key points. One is on the issue that in our experience of integration in Africa, what we struggle with a lot is the question of shallow integration, where the integration has been mostly focused on removing tariffs, non-tariff barriers. But what is very critical is that for a bloc like the African Continental Free Trade Area to succeed, we need deep integration. So a key pillar of that is structural transformation, all right? Because already, as some of the speakers have mentioned, already there's evidence of some success, for example, in Southern Africa. And if we look at intra-African trade statistics, already we can see there's potential for manufacturing, for example, because about 55% of intra-African trade is actually in manufactures. All right, and that's on an overall basis of very low trade, but of that trade that exists, you already have quite a bit of trade in manufacturers. So I'd say a critical issue is integrating that from a policy perspective with industrial policies. We need to, in each African country, we need to think seriously about the question of industrial policy. Because in some countries, we have some strategies, broad strategies for some subsectors like manufacturing, but very few African countries have a coherent industrial policy. All right, so I think that's a very central solution for me. This idea that of having an industrial policy to foster deep integration. So thinking about how can the African Continental Free Trade Area fit into a coherent industrial policy that discusses all the sorts of issues we talked about earlier, like rules of origin, regional value chains, and so on. So I think that's a very central aspect for me. Second aspect is...
Robert, just because we want to cover a lot of topics, could I ask Indioka to jump in and give his, because we've got a lot. Yeah, Indioka.
Okay, no problem. All right.
Indioka?
I think Bright had hit the nail on the head when he talked about cultural integration. You know, aside from being on the same continent, the Africans are not a homogeneous society. We have more things that divide us than the ones that keep us together. And that is a challenge we must confront. You have countries with small populations. You have countries with very disparate economies. You have countries which are developed in different status, least developed countries and non-LDCs. And all that is a factor that we have to take into consideration. So building a common thread for integration, a common thread that brings people together with Pan-Africanism in mind, the real soft, both political and social integration that allows us to share common values as African people, to not see each other as threats. And this will help if we build this starting first with the regional economic communities and then catapult this onto the continental level. It will help us to deal with very simple things like tariff liberalization. You know, we are stuck in this tariff discussion because of protectionism.
Yeah, and Dioka, but what does this really look like? I mean, you know, just getting very specific, like what does that really look like? Because you have regional economic communities, you have a lot of these infrastructure, you have a lot of this momentum, a lot of this ideology of Pan-Africanism, unity, we're all one brother, you know, we're all in it together, etc. But in reality, that's obviously not what's happening, right? So what would you practically suggest? Like, what does this really look like?
You know, let's take the EAC as an example. You know, we have some things that we share in common within the region. Language is one of them. You know, Kiswahili is in 3 of the 4. Actually, Kiswahili is in all countries, in different states, in different levels of fluency. But building on cultural common points to sort of de-risk political differences is very important, because it then allows policymakers to take a non-adversarial view when they are discussing things like rules of origin, tariffs, and some of those softer issues that have prevented genuine integration at the regional community level. And I think it's actually easier at that point to then integrate at the continental level, because the regional differences seem to take larger precedence than the ones within the continent as a whole. So I would say the starting point first is to get the people to understand the opportunity, to believe in it, and to really direct their political leaders to seize that opportunity for the benefit of their populations.
On the implementation side, Francis, if I can ask you in terms of your idea around top solution, top idea in terms of solving some of the implementation barriers?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, implementation actually has been the biggest problem for African integration. It has been said that we are good at signing documents, at signing agreements, protocols, and then forgetting them very quickly, hardly before the ink dries. So that is supposed to be our reputation. But I believe that can change. I think the problems we have had with implementation relate, first of all, to lack of capacity. Let's just call it skills, knowledge. We have had regional economic communities with lots of programs that are hardly known by government officials who are supposed to implement them, whether they be customs officials or standards officials, causing what we call non-tariff barriers. So this idea of training our people, making sure they know the rules, they can play the ropes, I think is very important. Then secondly, financial resources. We have had governments reading their annual budgets, and then you look through the entire budget and you don't see any budget line for regional integration, or simply a small amount of about 1% of the total budget. A huge chunk of the budget, I think, usually goes to defense and things like that. So financial resources as well. And then thirdly, ownership by stakeholders. If people don't know about this agreement, what is in it for them? If the users, like the private sector, are not aware of these opportunities, of course, it will be irrelevant and idle. So they will continue trading with China, with Europe, more than they trade within Africa. So I believe that these three are extremely important, and they need to be addressed through training, financial resources, and then ownership through stakeholder awareness creation programs. And to do this, we need political leadership and ownership. But we also need leadership within the private sector to mobilize stakeholders to use the agreement. And we need leadership within the academia to introduce courses on regional integration so that we have students graduating to go into government, to go into the private sector, to go into the academia, who know about regional integration and what is in it for the whole of Africa. This would be my take. Thank you.
On the commercial barrier side, George and Arti, your thoughts in terms of top ideas or solutions to address the commercial barriers? George, if we can start with you.
Sure. I think from a shipping perspective, and I see this on a daily basis, I think one of the biggest barriers is it's non-tariff barriers, it's lengthy regulatory and customs administration. You've got these very expensive pre-shipment inspections, especially for like samples. We have customers who send samples, and to get that order later on, and they're paying $250 for a sample that's worth $25, starts making it unaffordable. But we're seeing these delays as well, and they're missing. And African countries are actually missing out on big deals that would help them grow because they can't get their goods to their customers so they can test them and so they can pick the African company to send the raw products and everything. Now, I think one of the ways we could as a region try and smooth this out is maybe through an authorized economic operator program through the whole region, very similar to what Europe does. And what does that do? Well, it lets companies, the compliant companies, it lets them operate in a very smooth and efficient way to move their goods around through countries, through the trading blocks countries, and it leverages that trading block to make them more profitable, more efficient. So Arti, I'd like to hear your view on that.
So Yeah, thanks for that, because I'm actually going to lead on from what you've said. I mean, doing business on the continent is expensive, right? So as a foreign company, FALA, how will the AFCFTA benefit us? Let's say I want to manufacture a product in one of, or a handful of jurisdictions, and then distribute them to other countries on the continent. Today, we manufacture single-use medical instruments and procedure packs, and we import them. And that could be a maternity pack that can help safe delivery of one of the millions of babies that are born on the continent every year. But I have to register each product in each country, more or less. I present the same documents and pay for the registration in each country, and it's cumbersome and it's expensive. So I'd really like to see the AFCFTA saying, you know what? All of this licensing is going to be centralized. So if a product's approved in one country, it can be immediately sold in another. And in the short term, maybe there can be mutual recognition. So in our case, if Kenya's Pharmaceuticals and Poisons Board approves a product, then Nigeria's NAFDAC or Ghana's FDA says, yeah, bring it in. We accept that certification. That for me would be a very practical removal of commercial barriers, because our products just become prohibitively expensive.
On the infrastructure barrier side, Bright, your idea in terms of your top solutions?
So the funny thing, Chitra, is that it's very difficult to distinguish between soft and hard infrastructure. Let me give you an example. On the coast of Ghana is a city called Tema. Tema is the port city. And if you brought items to Tema and you wanted to move it to Burkina Faso, you need 50 different documents. And to get to Burkina Faso, you go through in the region of about 75 checkpoints. Now, it doesn't matter how brilliant you do the rail network, right? You can connect a great rail network between Tema and Ghana and Burkina Faso. If I still have to go through 75 checkpoints, most of them ad hoc, my travel time is still 5 times longer than if I don't have to go through any checkpoints. So the difficulty with trying to understand the infrastructure liberalization or the infrastructure enhancement situation is how closely linked the soft and the hard infrastructure factors are. Let me give you another example. Electricity distribution in the sub-region. We have something called the West Africa Power Pool. Theoretically, Ghana now has enough excess energy capacity that a whole bunch of countries in the region don't even have to invest in additional infrastructure to produce energy. Because the Ghanaians have what? 25%, 30% excess capacity that they are struggling to deal with. Ghana is losing hundreds of millions of dollars because it's paying for power based on contracts assigned that it can't use. The reason why the WAP, the West African Power Program, is challenging is because primarily when it comes to the switching, a lot of that is regulatory harmonization. So my very simple solution is this. Can we have a mechanism for regulatory harmonization that focuses on consulting companies and legal companies across the region becoming more active as transmediary organizations in the region? So not merely expanding from one country to the other as we typically do, doing the same things and replicating them across the border, but forming networks of firms that understand regulation well enough and then investing in the lobbying to make it happen. So Dr. Mangeni, who obviously I have a lot of time for, talks about the fact that we need more capacity through more resource investment. My challenge is a lot of that time, that resource is already available. It's just the configuration that makes it impossible to unlock these resources. So we need innovation around how we work together as elites, whether as people that own companies across the border, coming together and investing in lobbying together and spending less time paying for executive education courses in Oxford and Cambridge, just so we can look more sexy to European counterparties. I think there is a certain value systems reform that we need as Africans to want to impress Togolese when we are Ghanaian, to want to impress Nigerians when we are Gabonese, and stop trying to impress the West so much. I think that is a big hurdle. So we're not investing enough in regional things. And I think the private sector could do more. Thank you.
So I want to leverage a phrase that Bright just talked about. He just talked about a network of friends. So with that phrase going deeper, and we've talked about this throughout the session so far, there's different stakeholder interests, different stakeholders with different interests, and how do we align this? Because according to the UN, the regional economic communities, the RECs, they're not going to disappear. As we've talked about, intra-Africa trade is highly concentrated within the RECs. More than half of total intra-Africa trade takes place within the Southern African Customs Union, and more than 65% takes place within the Southern African Development Community. And so, Nzioka, if we could start with you, and then Robert, getting your perspectives, how do we practically align interests?
Chitra, you know, there's no escaping the rigmarole of dealing with the current outstanding issues on the CFTA. Even within the regional economic communities, there are disparities between member states in terms of their developing status. We have to deal with this, and the political goodwill to engage each other, first of all, to agree at regional economic level on essential things like tariffs. Liberalization, you know, the African Union set into place under the CFTA a path for liberalization of a number of sectors, transport, telecommunications, and others. These are still very closed in a number of countries. And they are closed for varied reasons. They are closed because of the politics in those countries, number one, where liberalizing those sectors has a direct equation to political stability. So we can only move at the pace of the slowest member. And that's the reality that we live in today. There are other external factors that come into play, particularly in the Horn of Africa and in Central Africa and in parts of North Africa, which is violent extremism. And this has led to the increased securitization of border points because of the threat of ISIS, Al-Shabaab, and others. And that is playing a big role in terms of creating non-tariff barriers for regional connectivity. So there's no escaping dealing with these issues one by one, systemically at intergovernmental level, and resolving them. And that way we get closer and closer to political alignment. And when that is reached, then we come closer to the objectives of the free trade area.
Robert, any thoughts?
Yes, I would say that proper stakeholder analysis and engagement, those are the critical things. Know who the stakeholders are for a particular issue, for example, regional value chains. Know what their interests are. Know where the potential areas of conflict are, so that as you design policies, you can mitigate this. And then very critical also, engage the stakeholders. Okay, so the African Continental Free Trade Area components will need a lot of policy advocacy with critical stakeholders like the private sector. That will need to be evidence-based. We have to conduct research, so there has to be a linkage with academia, so that academia can conduct research on potential benefits and challenges and how they can be overcome. And then as we're doing policy advocacy, we have to present some of this evidence to critical stakeholders. For example, private sectors that are concerned that they're going to lose market shares and face stiff competition. Then we have to see who the key opinion shapers are and people who can influence public policy in the area of regional integration and target them with appropriate messages. So we have to carefully design messages to make sure that the critical people who can really move the agenda forward and participate in implementation are able to understand our evidence and move the process forward. Thank you.
So far, 5 countries in Eastern Africa have actually ratified the CFTA: Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. So they'll all begin a reduction in their tariffs in January, and they represent about 3/4 of regional GDP. So this is very significant. On a practical level, both from the government and the private sector, what will we start to see on the ground in January? This is open to anyone who wants to jump in and answer. Or Nzioka, I can direct it to you to start.
Well, hopefully, we need to, well, the government has a role to play in terms of just civic education, because it's not the government that will be doing business, it's a private sector. And we have a duty to share this information as widely as possible in a format that can be consumed and actioned by private sector actors. But on the domestic front, you know, we have taken fairly stringent measures on import substitution from imports that come outside our economic region. And we are quite strict about that. We have about $1 billion worth of imports of things that can be made either in Kenya or within the EAC. And we've started even in our tax policy to implement that. So I do hope that in January, we'll start seeing business people taking advantage of this and allowing and calling us out as the government for where the shortcomings may be, so that we deal with those issues systematically and we make them part of our agenda when we engage neighboring states, so that we can resolve these issues on behalf of the business community.
Yeah, because part of it is on a practical level. It's taking this agreement and how do people experience it? How will people feel it on the ground, right? So whether you're a large company, whether you're an entrepreneur or small business owner, whether you're a consumer. And so, you know, what is it going to actually look like? Are people going to see a difference in terms of more money in their pocket? What are business owners going to see in terms of, you know, more revenue or wages with employees or their ability to do business? And so, you know, Artie, George, your thoughts?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll just say that I absolutely agree that there's a role for private business and industry associations. We've got the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, you've got the equivalent in Nigeria, you've got, you know, all these industry associations around the continent. They really do need to pressurize their governments. And I think the media needs to be a channel through which these discussions happen, because that way you can also bring in the citizens and inform the citizens and get them involved. I was discussing this with the Africa International Trade and Commerce Research think tank, and there's plenty of empirical evidence explaining the opportunity. We're just not getting the message out there, and the private sector is not using the message to quote unquote lobby government. I think at the same time, government really needs to think about being good corporate citizens. You know, on the one hand, yes, they will earn less in tariffs for existing products, but you know, there's a much, much bigger missed opportunity. We have underserved needs on the continent that I've already mentioned and I won't repeat, but focus on those rather than worrying about tariffs and competition in existing goods. Think about what research and development can do, what the circular economy can do, and suddenly the pot becomes much bigger.
George, your thoughts in terms of how this will translate on the ground from a business perspective, even in terms of entrepreneurs or small business? What effect will be seen and felt on the ground come the new year in terms of the countries that have ratified?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on from Artie there, because she raises a very good point. Is, you know, it's a very short-termism. We don't look at or in Africa we don't seem to look at the long game. So you know, I work for DHL Express. We deal with small fast packages, you know, of usually low values, but these packages, you know, as I said before, they're like samples and stuff for the bigger orders that come on. So they get very blinkered. Everything has, you know, they must get their revenue. They must get their revenue on these very small things. But by doing that and putting those non-tariff barriers in front, is they don't get the bigger value later on. So they don't see that long game. What are we going to see from from this little region? I think Kenya has been outstanding. They've led from the front, new ICMS2 single window, fantastic. It's had a few bumps. I think it's been a bit painful, the implementation. There's certainly been some unexpected little bumps they've had, but they've worked through it, and they've given, I think, East Africa a bit of a guide on how to do this. A single window, speeds clearance up. It makes goods flow through the borders quicker. I think on the ground, yes, I think we're going to see clearance times lower. I think less inspections, hopefully. A more risk-based approach from customs organisations within those countries. So we'll see, and it's going to take time. It's not going to change overnight, because we've also got to think about organisational cultural change within customs administrations. They're very set in their ways. They need to, the people at the top, they get it. Yep. Trade facilitation, they get it. But as you go further down the ladders, they don't. They see technology as a threat, going to take them away, not make them more productive, more quicker. So it's going to take some time, but I'm confident we'll get there.
So I think, businesses in other countries will be looking to see, practically what happens on the ground in January in these 5 countries that have ratified. What are the tangible results? What are the tangible results that you think entities, governments, businesses, that people will want to see to maybe motivate and get other countries to ratify? Right, if I can ask you to share your perspective.
Hi, Chitra, can you repeat that? I missed a bit of it.
I said, what do you think will be required to get other countries to ratify the agreement? What, in terms of these 5 countries that have ratified, where you'll start to see tariff reductions in January, what are some of the tangible results that are required to maybe motivate other countries to actually ratify?
So right now we have nearly 31, because Nigeria, once it deposits the instrument with 31 countries, that will leave 23 countries that have signed but not ratified. In almost all instances, the very specific issues. So in the case of Benin, they were waiting for Nigeria. There's a whole bunch of things. I think that Benin will ratify very soon. In some of the other countries, you have unresolved issues around local trade corridor problems. So a lot of it is going to require the Secretary General to be more equipped, because he has to go around now and do most of the lobbying. Of course, the AUTDTI has always been the home of this, and we're the interim secretariat, so we need to resource them even better. I think we may need to decide as a continental union whether we want to invest additional resources in hiring actual effective consultants, the same way that we hire consultants in the US and in Europe and in the UK to lobby the American government and the rest of it. Is this worth enough for us to spend additional resources as a continental union doing the national level lobbying? Because in all of those cases, you need domestic lobbying. You need people in the country putting this up on the priority agenda. And let's be honest, I don't think there's any country in Africa where AfTA on its own is a national priority yet. We're not at that level yet. So if you are in a country like Chad or somewhere else, there are a lot of other bigger problems. So we need to figure out, how do we get more resources in to get consultants that are dedicated to the domestic lobbying agenda? That's the only way we get the remaining on board. But we don't need everybody on board to get a great AfTA going. 31 countries is already one of the biggest trade pacts in the world by the number of participating sovereign entities. So we already have a lot of countries, some of them big countries. How do we make sure that within that segment, we're seeing the highest trade come January 2021?
And on the and when it comes to the private sector, RT, you talked a little bit in terms of your background, right? Straddling both worlds in terms of a foreign headquartered company in Africa, and then also doing a lot of work and consulting with African companies. And so on both sides of the equation, what are the incentives for foreign companies as well as African companies for this to work, and what role can they play to make it succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always go back to what problems our country is trying to solve, right? And let's take a developmental issue, and then we can take other issues after that. But working in healthcare, we look very closely at maternal mortality And SDG 3.1 wants to bring that down to 70 by 2030. Countries like Nigeria, it's between the high 500s and low 900s per 100,000 live births. And in Kenya, it's between 342 and 362 per 100,000 live births. So the problem I want to solve is I want to bring it down to 70 because it's SDG 3.1, but it's also good for me as a country, right? To have fewer women dying giving birth to children. So then you start thinking, how can I solve this? What are the root causes of these problems? Women not getting to healthcare facilities on time, women not having a safe, hygienic environment in which to give birth. So if I, as Fala, can bring in products and even manufacture on the ground products that are going to help some of the 7 million births in Nigeria a year, the 1.5 million in Uganda, the 1.5 million in Kenya, etc., make them safer, then isn't that a good problem for me to solve? So now what's stopping me from doing it? Well, I need to put up a plant. Okay, I've got all of the requirements around, so putting up a manufacturing plant. I obviously need electricity and talent, etc., etc. Now I'm going to start producing these products, and I want to move them around the continent because I'm not going to have a manufacturing base in all 54, 55 countries. How can I do that easily, cost effectively, and without having to worry about things being stuck in customs for weeks or months? These things should be seamless. I should be able to see from my device, oh yes, the goods are now here. Oh yes, the goods are now here. And that should all be happening in a timely manner. That is the sort of thing that the AFCFTA needs to bring about. Otherwise, we are not going to start solving some of these problems.
Something that you all talked about was on the user adoption side or the implementation side is that momentum, getting everyone bought in, the government level, the business level, the consumer level. And earlier, Dr. Francis mentioned in his comments about the median age being 19.7 in Africa. And so the tremendous opportunity for energy, passion, creativity that's available. And so I'd love each of you to share your perspective on this, which is in terms of, you're someone listening to this session, you're an entrepreneur, you're a small business owner. What's in it for you? How do you participate in this opportunity? How do you participate in coming up with a solution, whether it's to the hard or soft infrastructure barriers that Bright talked about earlier? So each of you, if each of you could share your perspective, and I'll start with Robert in terms of the opportunity for entrepreneurs, for small business owners, the opportunities, what's in it for them, how do they get behind us?
I think there are many great opportunities, and I think I mentioned already, even within existing intra-African trade, there are manufacturing opportunities. Already that's dominated by manufacturing, which is very interesting because Africa's trade with the rest of the world is dominated by primary products. So already there's a significant difference in the intra-African trade in terms of the commodities and the trade that goes outside. I think specific opportunities could be processed food, textiles, light manufacturing, leather. This could be specific opportunities that small businesses could take advantage of. I think a very important point is most African economies have large informal sectors. So we need to provide incentives for formalization of informal sector firms, because I think they are much more likely to compete effectively to take advantage of these opportunities if they are formal sector firms. Thank you.
Nzioka?
I mentioned earlier about Kenya's exports. 40% of what Kenya exports is within Africa, and primarily manufactured goods. Now, I think there is a lot of room to increase this, and I believe one of the issues that require some form of alignment between the regions is who does what and who is best positioned to do what. So as an example, Kenya has become a hub for automotive assembly plants, international automotive assembly plants. Now, based on the rules of origin within the EAC, is it going to be a requirement that these manufacturers have to set up very high capex plants in other countries within the region so as to supply the region, or can they just simply do it from one center? And each country is actually well positioned to produce a number of things. One, maybe because of their geography, because of their access to raw materials, because of intellectual capacity or human capital supply. So I think it's just important for us to get alignment so that once we remove replication within different countries, it then provides a greater incentive for manufacturers to establish very robust plants in one particular part of the region, because they have the confidence that they can reach the wider market from there. And it avoids them having to incur heavy costs, heavy setup costs. So if we can fix the logistics and we can fix the issues touching on how their products are treated at the point of export or import within Africa, I believe we'll be able to grow our manufacturing sector quite well. And take, from an external point of view, we need to be a bit more discerning in what we allow to come from outside Africa. Should we be getting toothpicks and such things? It's ridiculous what we get in from out of Africa, and we can immediately put a stop to that.
Artie, George, your perspectives?
I'd just like to add one thing around African institutions, because you asked me as an advisor to African companies. I'd really love to see Pan-African financial institutions that aren't just present in individual African jurisdictions, but are able to facilitate intra-Africa trade using modern technology and drastically reduced costs. The cost of finance on the continent is extortionate, and we're not going to have a vibrant economy unless that comes down. That will need central banks. But if we do it, we will have scale, right? So today, a textile manufacturer in Kano in northern Nigeria should be able to buy cotton, some of the world's best cotton, from Burkina Faso next door, without losing truckloads on the exchange rate and waiting for days for the transaction to happen. And these are two neighboring countries, think about, and two countries within a regional economic bloc. I also think from a capital markets perspective, we need to be a lot smarter. Maybe we've got too many stock exchanges or exchanges on the continent, and we don't have enough products. So maybe we need more green bonds, maybe we need more derivatives. So I think the whole financial services, we have a great opportunity. Somebody just has to seize it.
George?
Yeah, I think just following on from Artie there, and we were talking about how we've always been or countries have been quite isolatory or everything, and we've actually gone inwards within the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we're all talking about within Africa. Why aren't we talking out of Africa? We are 55 countries, 1.2 billion people on the doorstep of Europe, in the middle of Asia Pacific and America, is with a consolidated voice of all 55 countries. We should be one of the major players, or will be one of the major players in international trade in the next 10 to 30 years, say. Is we need to have a voice as a continent, as a trading bloc, and we need to drive that. So our small and micro, small, medium enterprises can grow and have a voice, be more competitive when they're dealing with customers in Europe. They have an online presence, is facilitate their growth by having a voice together. It's stronger together. That's just my take on it.
And actually, on this notion of voice, I'd actually ask Bright to give his thoughts on this, which is, how will consumers feel the impact? What voice do consumers have in this process? Right, your take on that.
So that's a tough question. We have to obviously recognize that we currently been talking about the AfTA in relation to physical goods and products. But there is also the whole area of services and intellectual property the kind of things that also bother people like RT. So let's focus on physical products for a moment. If you're a consumer, obviously, and this is where I think specialization is going to be important, because as everybody has said many times before, it's really about value chains, not necessarily about just trade in that broad sense. It's really value chains. So it's always going to be specific products where the tariff element is such a hindrance. It's not just going to be about products generally. So first of all, if you're a consumer and you are in a particular area like pharmaceuticals, which can have a really powerful effect on your well-being, and if there are local production next door, and because tariff is such an important element in some respects, this may mean that you're getting your medicines cheaper. But that brings a whole range of other trust-related issues that I don't think AFTA on its own can solve. So that is on the physical goods and physical product side of things. On the services side, I think that's where we have our biggest opportunity. Because on the services side, if you're a lawyer in one country, if I want to hire a cheaper lawyer next door, if I want to hire a cheaper accountant next door, we don't have the same non-tariff barrier problems, or a designer next door, or this kind of thing. And I think in that respect, the OHADA program in Francophone Africa offers us an extraordinary template to start to think what is possible on the after. Because if I can, because I have a registration and a certification in one country, as Ati was talking about in the context of product certification, but let's think about professional certification. If I'm an accountant in Ghana, I should be able to offer my services in Gambia. And in those areas and in those contexts, it shouldn't be difficult for the Gambians to agree to a mutual recognition protocol, particularly when we have a lot of educational interchanges and people now being able to go to medical school in one country and to practice in another country, which is what is happening between Ghana and Nigeria as an example. So I think in the whole of the service area, if I'm a consumer of education services, if I'm a consumer of health services, I am extremely interested in the ability to get my service across the border where it will cut my costs. And we can make dramatic progress there if we focus and we are innovative and we are relentless.
And then the last question before we get into some of the audience questions is employment. What will this mean for employment, wages, and creating that impact in terms of economic empowerment for the individual? So employment, wages, your thoughts. Ndioka, let's start with you.
So the CFTA is not a silver bullet. And you have to look at the minds of consumers. They will not buy a product simply because it is African. They'll buy the product because it's good quality, it works for them, and it meets international standards, or it meets or exceeds what they know or what they've been consuming from outside of Africa. So I think whereas the portends huge opportunities for jobs and for manufacturing, we have to, in a sense, leapfrog in terms of the technology that we must deploy immediately. So you can't go back to starting cottage industries for products that maybe you stopped from coming into your country that ought to meet a certain standard. So we really do need to embrace cutting edge technology and going back to the discussions on innovation. And when it comes to jobs, manufacturers would want to produce these goods optimally and cost efficiently so as to be competitive with international products. So the issue of productivity and workplace productivity in countries in Africa is something that we must address. Kenya, as an example, is an environment where productivity is a big challenge for us. People have guaranteed pay, but no guaranteed output. And that becomes a concern when you're trying to pivot towards manufacturing, which is all about efficiencies at all levels, including productivity. So I think we will have to look, have a look at the unions in the eye and really look at pay for output as a key point, because that will then allow us to be more competitive. And if you take the textile sector as an example, we've been exporting products into AGOA for the last, decade. But our textiles per unit cost compared to that in Vietnam or Sri Lanka is probably 10 or 20 times more expensive. and it's because of productivity and what each person can deliver within the working timeline. And I think that will be a key requirement, even as we look to create jobs and opportunities.
Anyone else here comments? Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that as a technologist, I see this as an opportunity for high value jobs. For example, ICT professionals who can program robots. If we don't seize the opportunity, then according to the ODI, which is a UK think tank, it'll be cheaper for robots in the US to produce furniture than in Kenya by 2033. So it's really Africa's to lose. Secondly, let's bring down other costs. I do absolutely agree that productivity has to go up, but cost of electricity in a country like Kenya is extraordinarily high. So if we can bring that down, then that brings down the overall cost of the product.
We've got one question here from the audience, Marianne. How do we get more manufacturing of raw materials done in the country of origin? Example, cocoa, coffee, tea, cashew nuts, and so forth. Anyone?
Maybe if I may venture a response to this. I think some things have happened in the world that are great opportunities for Africa. One of those is Brexit. Brexit gives a number of countries an opportunity to reposition themselves as to stop being exporters of raw materials and to be destinations for manufacturing and value addition. So, and as an example, really countries like Ghana, Ivory Coast, Kenya that have been exporting coffee and cocoa and tea in its rawest form just have to stop. With Brexit coming into effect, renegotiation of these economic partnership agreements and free trade agreements should, at the very essence, focus on bringing value addition in country, so that you start changing the quotas of what you export in terms of raw material and reducing those progressively. That allows more value to be retained locally, and really it allows us to deal with the missing link in agriculture, which is really value to the producer, to the actual farmers, who are the biggest losers in the entire agricultural value chain. And if we can domesticate value addition in this new paradigm, it will really help us to create genuine opportunities, sustainable opportunities, but more important, allow us to have a bigger piece of the cake.
Does anyone else want to add their comments to that question from Marianne? Dennis Rangi, he asks, how do we build the capacity of AU to ensure timely and effective operationalization of the CFTA?
Chitra, I think I should start coming in as well.
By all means.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, please. You want to talk about?
Okay, so starting with the first question, we obviously try to go the simple path of the things that people know: coffee, cocoa, tea, and so on and so forth. Do you know that Kenya probably can export half of its meat products to Saudi Arabia, but it can't meet the demand, and needs to work with the East African countries to export more meat? We have approximately 2,000 other products, agricultural products, other than those that we know, which are not marketed in the rest of the world. So I'll give you just one little example, and that is we have the chemical plant that artemisinin. Artemisinin is grown in small farmholds in Western Kenya, and it is one of the greatest products for curing malaria. Okay, we have so many indigenous trees that can be genetically studied for other solutions. So innovation here is fundamental. Now, how do we get intra-African trade on these areas? Let me tell you something. There are very many Kenyans who are flying to Nigeria on tourist visas, okay, to get some of the food products from Nigeria to Kenya. And we probably haven't done anything to improve that ability. And they're able to do that, and they trust the products because they have gone exactly where they're produced and know exactly what they're buying. All right. So the question here remains, are we going to let the government drive this, or are we going to allow a significant portion of the private sector to come in? How? I'll tell you that we are now developing from Strathmore the CEO platform in Uganda and Tanzania. And we are going to do it also in Rwanda. And the idea is that those CEOs meet frequently to discuss which products to exchange and how to exchange it in a reasonable way. And also what they're going to propose to governments from the point of view of incentives. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, if you do it from a government and politics perspective, my experience is that it doesn't work. We brought in here 10 of the most powerful business people from Nigeria to Kenya, but we did it politically. Okay, so political decisions are made, and they're made politically, and everybody finds themselves, short-changed in the process. No study and research has gone into it, and therefore, as soon as the Nigerians left, probably only one product out of the 20 or so products discussed has had intertrade between Kenya and Nigeria. So let me put it this way. We don't start association by very big ideas on policy. We start associations by seeing an opportunity, and those opportunities are in the private sector. And if there is one thing only that will improve this intra-African trade, is how our trade and investment offices and business commercial associations begin exchanging possibilities. And this is where we have to put an incentive through the African Union. How many of these business centers in each of the countries can come together to discuss? How many trade fairs do we have Nigerians and Kenyans and Egyptians, although with Egypt, so on and so forth? How do we begin? Simple things. And ahead of the trade fair, a discussion on one or two products, which may not be ranked very highly in terms of productivity and income in a country, as a source of exchange. You see, we have to go away from those things that are sensitive and touch the largest majority of our politicians and business people, and go to things that are innovative. Okay, this is what I think. It has to start at the personal business level of associations, and those associations can include small and medium enterprises, and that is the way we will begin a relationship. Finally, I think our education institutions should also start taking their students to African countries. I'm trying to propose this in Strathmore. People are interested in going to Italy and France and America, and I'm thinking, guys, the next market is Africa. you need to dress down and go wherever in Africa you think is safe, and we can even have somebody organizing secure trips for people. I know now we have a problem in Ethiopia, but Ethiopia is an incredible country in terms of possibilities. But in any case, anywhere in Africa, there are incredible possibilities, so long as they are secure. If our kids between 18 and 35 can have these ideas, these trips to other African countries to see what opportunities there are. Let me tell you, I don't want to speak too much because I'm already doing avocado in East Africa. There are big opportunities. Huge opportunities. But if you look at the apex of products, you're going to enter into very serious waters of disagreement because there are people entrenched there. Start innovating. Thank you.
We've got, there's actually a follow-up question from Anne for Nzioka. She said, excellent point to the earlier question about manufacturing. She said, but how can more value addition be done on the continent? What needs to be done to facilitate that, especially in agro-processing?
I think now we need to now go country specific and look at some of the what we call the enablers that need to be put in place. So we're in Kenya, if I were to give Kenya as an example, we are looking at the economic, special economic zones, which provide a very good regulatory and tax framework that allows us to take advantage of industrial migration. So we expect to see a lot of industries migrating from Southeast Asia and from Europe into Africa. And we want to be the country to receive those people for a number of reasons. One, because we believe we have the human capital. We believe we have, in large part, the infrastructure needed to evacuate goods. And what we are working on in terms of regulatory infrastructure is just making it more accessible, making this information more accessible. So if you took an example today, that in Dongo Kundu in Mombasa in 2 or 3 years, we should be able to see tea factories move entirely their packaging and value addition into Kenya. We can see producers of cosmetics as a case in point. You know, it's quite ironical that half the ingredients for very essential cosmetics come from Africa. So if you take lipstick as an example, both the shea butter and the Bixa come exclusively from Africa, you know, and there's nothing stopping us from allowing those manufacturers to bring their industries here and produce from here. You know, the issues of power, of course, we have to deal with the issues of corruption, rent seeking, and all the other kind of regulatory roadblocks. Those are work in progress. But I think the general architecture is in place to start seeing a migration of these industries, to start dealing with agro-processing, even within those economic zones, and allowing them to use that to catapult their presence to other African countries.
On that note, we are actually at time. So I'd love to invite Dr. Angela to give the closing remarks, but a special and warm thank you to all of our, so first of all, thank you to all of our audience, all of you who joined with us today from across Africa and other parts of the world, because we had participants in from other countries as well, like Canada, the United States, Netherlands, Belgium. So thank you so much to everyone around the world for tuning in. Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists and speakers, and to Strathmore University for hosting this session. So thank you so much. And Dr. Angela, I turn it over to you to close.
Okay, so Chitra, since you have appreciated everyone here, I will appreciate you for the excellent work you have done. We have indeed ended this year on a high note. We've had a series of CEO dialogues since May. And this is the final one for this year. So I believe we have been left with a lot to think about. The panelists have given us the opportunities that are coming up. I think as Africans, we tend to look at the challenges and the problems, but I think with problems and challenges come opportunities. For SBS, as we are looking forward into 2021, a lot of the challenges and some of the opportunities we see to partner with government as well as private sector are in the areas that were mentioned, such as building awareness, stakeholder engagement, as well as capacity building. Already we have done that with designing the global CEO with the AfCFTA in mind, bringing the private sector to start seeing how can they harness these opportunities in Africa. We are also working towards launching the network that Dr. Njenga has already discussed, so that we are actually doing this practically, bringing the business people together. Let's think through the opportunities as we solve each of the challenges as we go along. We are also looking at, as Dr. Njenga has said, working with the younger generation of leaders through our undergraduate programs to ensure that we are starting to expose them and build capacity for the future, because as we know, Africa, youngest continent. So we have to ensure that there is sustainable business for this future of our students, the future of our children. So thank you all, and we look forward to engaging with you. Please share with us any ideas that you might have on how we can enhance these forums and how we can continue these dialogues beyond this forum. And we look forward to having many of you join the forum once we launch it next year. My team, thank you so much, Shadrach, Edda, and the entire marketing team. You've done an excellent job, Carol, in coordinating this, and they will be following up with each one of you for any feedback that you might have for us. So thank you, and I dare say Merry Christmas at this particular point. So enjoy.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I'm sure I'm the first one who has wished you a Merry Christmas this year. Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye all. Thank you. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Leave.